Dear guests, the next panel discussion is What Really Happened in Cyprus? A Critical Assessment Since Independence and the Day Forward. Please take your seat while our speakers prepare for the panel.
So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I think this is the last panel of the day. It's going to be a very interesting one, since we have with us Mr. Andreas Theophanous, a professor of economics and public policy and president of the Cyprus Center for European and International Affairs. He is here to present his book, which is fresh off the press. Here it is. What Really Happened in Cyprus? A Critical Assessment Since Independence and the Way Forward. So without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Theophanous to the podium. Also, introducing our two panelists. They're both Associate Professors of International Relations, Mr. Michalis Kontos and Mr. Sevki Kiralp. Thank you very much for being here. Mr. Theophanous, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Evie. Thank you, Ms. Phillips. Thank you all for being here. It gives me pleasure that we have the opportunity to share with you some thoughts and views and perspectives in relation to this work. First of all, let me say the following. This work has been produced by research, primary and secondary research, for more than 40 years. And that also included discussions with politicians at the highest level, academics, journalists, and interested citizens from many countries, not only Cyprus, including the guarantor powers, members of the Security Council of the UN, and so on and so on. The book it has a prologue and introduction, 8 chapters, appendixes, bibliography, and it tries to address issues in a comprehensive way. It has historical perspective, political perspective, and at the same time, I try to address the future. Not only where we are right now, but what do we do? How do we move forward? And I raise certain questions. What I try to do also at the same time is to have an objective account, as objective as one can have, about what happened. And I also describe both endogenous and exogenous elements. And of course, when we talk about the Cypriot history and politics and what happened, we cannot judge Cyprus in the 50s and the 60s by what goes on today. Each case must be addressed with its own framework. You cannot compare, for example, the Republic of Cyprus in the 60s with France or Britain and their democratic systems. It is practically impossible. So this is essential. The other element is the crisis of 1974, the tragedy in 1974, and what has been taking place ever since then. Is it an outcome of endogenous or exogenous factors? I would say it's both. But if I were to judge, if I were to weigh what factors mostly push things to this direction, I would certainly say it's exogenous. That does not take away the responsibilities of Cypriots from all sides about what happened. Okay? And I want to be clear. The other element that is fundamental, and it's going throughout the book, it's the following question. It's a question, the examination of the role of international law and realpolitik and their importance in international relations. Cypriots, I would say, naively in the past, had the impression that international law is supreme. It's one thing to say that international law should prevail, and it's another thing to ask the question, does it prevail? I mean, it's two different concepts. I would say that to the present day, most Cypriots, and as well as mainland Greeks, have the impression that international law, at the end of the day, triumphs or prevails. I wish that was the case. We are far from it, unfortunately. Okay. Then I said I'm having these two questions raised throughout the book, but in two special chapters, chapter 6 and chapter 7, one see my efforts to address this question much more. In chapter 6 is entitled The Russian Invasion of Ukraine, the Broader Repercussions and the Cyprus Problem, and chapter 7, The Policies of the Guarantor Countries and of Other Powers on Cyprus. I mean, certainly each conflict, each case is unique, but both policymakers and academics, from time to time, they make comparisons to see possible similarities and the differences. I try to do the same thing. Now, if I were to say today, when Russia, soon after Russia invaded Ukraine, it became the most sanctioned nation in the world. In the case of the Turkish invasion and occupation of Cyprus, I haven't seen papers of the UN and the European Union describing what happened as invasion and what is taking place today as occupation. They even shy away from these words. I mean, why? Russia is perceived as a strategic foe of the West. Turkey is a strategic ally of the West. So that's the way it is done. Now, when it comes to the guarantor powers and the other powers on Cyprus, I would say, it is a historical reality that Greek Cypriots first felt that unification with Greece, exercise of self-determination and unification was their historical right. Was it? One could say yes. Nevertheless, this did not materialize. The Zurich and London agreements were an outcome of the balance, or rather, the imbalance of power in the Eastern Mediterranean. Greece was weak, Turkey was stronger and more needed, and Britain also had its own interest in Cyprus. So Cypriot Greeks were bitter. Not only enosis did not materialize, but they saw that the Turkish Cypriot community acquired much more rights and privileges than their numbers deserved, despite of the fact that mostly they sided with the colonial power and the outside power Turkey. There was a book written in 1972, very interesting book, by Ambassador Alexander Xidis, who, the title of the book was Reluctant Republic, meaning the republic didn't want to be born, But there it was. Mr. Kliridis said in the early 60s the following, Cypriot flag is a flag that nobody wants to die for, nobody's prepared to shed his blood for. As a matter of fact, it was allowed in the Constitution that the two communities would use their own flags in their ethnic or religious festivities. So there were more Greek and Turkish flags flying in Cyprus than the official Cypriot flag in the 60s. Cypriots, discovered the Cypriot flag, basically, soon after the Turkish invasion. I want to say something about a few days before the invasion. As a matter of fact, I have vivid memories from the 60s, as I was born in 1960. I was born with the Republic in February 1960, and I do have vivid memories from those times. Well, on 13th of July, 1974, the two constitutional advisors from Turkey and Greece, respectively, Mr. Altigashti and Dekleris, met in Famagusta and finalized the draft for the solution of the Cyprus problem based on the unitary state that was supposed to be discussed and finalized by Mr. Kliridis and Dektash on 16th of July 1974. That meeting never took place because the junta overthrew President Makarios. 20th of July, Turkey invaded Cyprus. It declared that its objective was to re-establish the constitutional order and protect the Turkish Cypriot community. 22nd of July, there is ceasefire. 23rd of July, we have the collapse of the junta in Greece, the collapse of the junta, and the collapse of the putschist government in Nicosia. Mr. Kliridis assumes presidential duties, and his first move, I think it was 23rd or 24th of July, asked the UN to arrange a meeting with Mr. Dektash. Kliridis, I think he went to the other side. And Mr. Kliridis told Mr. Dektash, you want constitutional order, let's do it. Not to have the agreement reached 2 days ago, but to go back in the 1960s, which was more favorable to the Turkish side. Dektash talked with Ankara and his answer came very soon. It's too late now. Okay. Although there was ceasefire, there was violations of the ceasefire continuously. And then in July 14th, there was a second attack on Cyprus, which ended with a 37% occupation of the northern part of Cyprus, ethnic cleansing that followed, and so on, and so on. Negotiations ever since did not produce any results. Cypriots were asked to accept federation. They did. They were going from concession to concession, but nothing came up. There were various plans, basically the American, British, Canadian 78, Cuellar indicators 83, 85, Gali set of ideas 1992, Annan plan, and the Guterres informal document. Now, these negotiations, of course, reflected, and their outcome reflected the imbalance of power. I mean, that's what they reflected. Okay, nothing came out. I would say there has been Turkish maximalism. You may tell me why the Annan plan didn't go through. The answer is that most Cypriots, including myself, thought that if implemented, it would worsen the status quo for the Greek Cypriots. Cyprus would be at the second and the third state, and Turkey would have overwhelming control in the affairs of the island. I mean, and I would say that most plans, if all plans discuss the creation of a new state, I would say that no Syrian state negotiates its own existence. I mean, the other thing I want to say is the following. How much time? 9 minutes. Okay, good. I would say the following. I would say that in '74, Greek Cypriot society found itself in a shock, the political system and society. I would say that Cypriot Greeks never came out of that confusion and shock. It's to a lesser extent today, but it's there. I see things that are, sometimes not so consistent. And I would say that the negotiations taking place ever since, they didn't lead to an outcome. So personally, what I try to do is talking about the future, is to make suggestions for the future. I'm not saying that if implemented they would lead somewhere, but I think we would be better off. Why? I think foreigners think that Cypriot Greeks know what they don't, they are sure about what they don't want, but they are not aware of what they want. I mean, that's part of the confusion. I don't share this. Maybe it's not very well articulated. So in my work, I have tried to put things on paper and boldly. So my suggestions, it has 3 pillars. Pillar number 1 is suggestions for the constitutional reform so that we move into a normal federal state. These suggestions, they talk about guarantees, security, governance, presidency, Supreme Court, economy, territory, the settlers, property. That is suggestions. And then the second pillar, it's a set of CBMs and other other acts of cooperation between Cypriot Greeks and Cypriot Turks, but also trying at the same time to engage the three guarantor countries and other powers to try to create a win-win situation. So that's the second pillar, and I can go, if we have the time, I can go in detail into them. And the third pillar, I'm very blunt about that, adopting an evolutionary approach. Why evolutionary approach? When, as a young academic in the 90s, I put this idea about evolutionary, people were not very happy with me. Why? Because they wanted everything now, and they wanted everything to be settled now. I said that's not possible, and that's not an opinion. I said this is the outcome of study. There is conflict. There are no common objectives. There is a very heavy historical record. Mistrust. You need time to decrease mistrust. You need time to build the networks of interest for people to have mutual gains. You need time. And I said, okay, when I discuss this right now with some of my fellow citizens, including politicians, they tell me, Andreas, we should have done that long ago. Well, we didn't do it long ago, but it's better to start late than start never. Okay, so this comes the evolutionary approach, because I have no doubt in my mind that you cannot move forward from one state to affairs in another in 24 hours. And also, I want to give you some examples about these ideas. I mean, when we talk about presidency, I adopt the American system of American president and vice president that they run together. Okay, if I'm a Greek Cypriot, and if I want to run for president, I have to take a Turkish Cypriot with me as vice president. Or if a Turkish Cypriot wants to be president, he can take a Greek Cypriot with him as vice president. That would advance common agendas, because what has been practiced in the Republic, when Greek Cypriots talk to their audiences, they talk one language. When they talk to diplomats, another language. When they talk to the other community, another language. I think this will introduce common language. To say this is a political program, a political agenda that we are addressing the Cypriots. And in my mind, for example, there are certain things that it's not a matter of community. For example, when it comes to health, if, for example, to treat cancer, this is not a bicommunal issue. Cancer it addresses everybody. You need to address it comprehensively. You need to address, for example, when it comes to environment is a common challenge. So I'm trying to create some common objectives. The other element that I want to introduce is, for example, when they say mechanism of resolving differences, I would say the following. Take the Supreme Court, which I think it should resolve differences. Before 74, the negotiations between Mr. Kliridis and Mr. Dektash, the agreement was 6 Greek judges and 3 Turkish judges. On the plan it says 3 Greeks, 3 Turks, and 3 foreigners. I'm saying 4 Greeks, 4 Turks, and 1 from the smaller communities. And if there is a problem, who will be the president of the Supreme Court? I would say the oldest one or the youngest one. Okay, so you have 9. So when there is an issue, it would be decided it would be decided. And I wish the time comes that you are going to have voting where people do not vote necessarily based on their ethnic line. Now, what I have in mind, it's difficult. It needs the cooperation of Turkey above all. Okay. The question is that can Turkey be given enough incentives to cooperate with that? The other element I would say the following, and I'm closing with this. How do we assess the Republic of Cyprus? It has been 65 years. Well, on some issues it has done well, on some issues not so well. That it has survived, it's an achievement. Given everything, that it has survived, it's an achievement. Second, it became a member of the European Union. Okay, we had higher expectations, be that as it may, we are a member. Member of the Eurozone, although we didn't, the record has not been very good there. But there are other distinctions. For example, we need more political sophistications. Cypriot Greeks have not realized the importance of utilizing knowledge, utilizing think tanks, and participating much more in the international market of exchange of ideas. So what is taking place today here in cooperation with the Cyprus Forum is such an activity which is impressive, and the state should support this much more. And the business community, it must do it much more. And I would also say, and I'm very blunt here, there's nothing wrong to say when we discuss the Cyprus problem, we have minimum and maximum objective. And I want to say 2-3 last words on that. For me, the minimum objective is to make sure that things don't get worse. For example, as a Cypriot Greek, I wouldn't like things to deteriorate for the Republic of Cyprus and for all Cyprus as a whole. I think it's common sense. Now, maximum objective, I would like to see the fulfillment of a truly independent state, and that can be achieved via a normal federal state. Sometimes I hear about unitary state. Well, it is not realistic. And sometimes I hear words about any solution. That is also naive. So you need pragmatism, and you have to put things down and move on accordingly. I know that we are in a very difficult neighborhood. I know that things are also influenced not only from what happens in Cyprus, but also from what happens outside. But we must do our part. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Theophanous. I would like to invite Professor Kontos, whatever is more comfortable for you, obviously. Okay.
Thank you very much. Congratulations to the organizers for this very insightful and institutionalized set of debates. I am honored to be invited. I would like also to thank Professor Theophanous for including me in his book review series. Actually, I have had the honor to review his book, the Greek version of his book in the past, in another event. So this time I won't discuss the book in detail. I will cherry pick some very specific points that I would like to illuminate for your attention. And I would also like to discuss, instead of the book, the author. I have been cooperating with Professor Theophanous over the last 10 or so years. He honors me with his friendship, and we have done some serious work together, for which I feel deep gratitude. And I think he, in this book and in the Greek version of the same book, I think he has taken a very serious exercise. What I mean by exercise, I have stopped including the Cyprus or the Cyprus question in my personal research ever since 2010, 2011. And the reason is because I strongly believe that to study, to research the problems of your country in a scholarly manner, you have to rethink your traditional personal biases. If you are a researcher, therefore a scholar, you are pursuing the truth. Nothing else should be negotiated about your objectives. If you are a politician, or an activist, you are pursuing your desires. It's two total different things. Rethinking now, what kind of a project is it to rethink your traditional biases in order to be able to deal in a scholarly manner with a problem of your own country as a political scientist or as a historian. You need to delve into the social construction of the Cyprus question and its sub-constructions. We need to transcend societal or environmental elements and inject pragmatism in your assessment of the problems of your country. You need to acknowledge the natural forces of the international system and test your desires against them, because if your desires clash with the natural forces of the international system, you are doomed. That's saying I am revealing my theoretical profile as well. I'm a realist, most of the time, not always. And it's also very important to strike a balance between, when it comes to the Cyprus question particularly, to strike a balance between the two analytical extremes. On the one hand, we do have this so-called fatalism, often disguised as pragmatism, versus the hardline rejectionism, often seen by its own supporters as patriotism or Thucydidean power-centric realism, which I reject totally. So it's about transcending ideological stereotypes, and transcending ideological stereotypes equals to removing the curtain that distorts the actual display of reality from your face. Seeing the reality through ideological stereotypes, you are not looking at the face of the reality. You are looking at the face of your stereotypes. In domestic politics, this is often unavoidable. Being a politician is all about maintaining specific stereotypes. It goes without saying. But in domestic politics, the clash between different ideologies and different sets of stereotypes is arranged by the legal and the political system of the country, which sets limitations and confines this struggle within these specific limitations. But when your desires, which are ideologically defined, are aiming to push your government towards fighting another government to make your desires materialized, this is fatally disastrous. So in domestic politics it works, but in international politics, and the Cyprus question is a problem of international politics, as Andreas Theophanous just said, it causes catastrophes. Theophanous fights very decently, in my viewpoint, not only this book, but generally in his later works, to exit this vicious circle of stereotypes, of fighting with your own inside inherent beliefs, by injecting pragmatism without, though, transforming himself. This book is not a self-transformation. It's an injection of pragmatism in his own personal, historical and political assessment. You need to remember, for Theophanous, that he's a Greek Cypriot who was born in 1960. Apologies for revealing the age. I think you are telling it publicly. He was born in the very year of Cyprus independence. He was born in a period when a Greek Cypriot, I repeat, in a period when the Eoga spirit was still vivid. It was still arranging politics in the Greek Cypriot society. He is also a person with traumatic memories from the 1974 invasion as a teenager back then. However, through his later books, he has fought decently to transcend the biases stemming from his personal experiences and putting them in a frame of scholarly analysis and assessment. There are two indicators which, in my viewpoint, testify for this injection of pragmatism in Theophanous' later works. I don't argue that his early works were bad. The contrary, they were pretty good. And actually, I am very often citing his work on the accession of Cyprus to the European Union in my own publications. But when it comes to his later publications, which delve into the history of the Cyprus problem for the first time in such depth, I think he had to fight with himself pretty much, and he's successful. There are two indicators, in my view, which testify this success. Indicator number one, his very sophisticated revision of Makarios' pragmatism in the late 1960s. In a Greek Cypriot environment back in the 1960s and 1970s, arguing that Makarios was right rejecting enosis in favor of maintaining independence, you could have been shot back in the 1960s and 1970s. You would have been labeled as a traitor. Makarios has been labeled as a traitor by the hardline part of the Cyprus, of the Greek Cypriot political system. Although Theophanous does not conceal Makarios' propensity towards political power, his huge ego, actually, and his propensity to feeding his own legend, he is revising him as a pragmatist, at least in the late 1960s. And if the right wing had listened to him, things would have been dramatically different in Cyprus. The second point, and this is my final one, which in my view testifies that he's done a really good scholarly work, fighting his own biases very successfully, is his proposals for a solution of the Cyprus problem, which is not new in his work. He has been actually making proposals ever since the 1990s. But I am pinpointing on the concept of evolutionary approach, which he also raised in his presentation. I think it is very important. It is very important because it highlights that the politicians, the leaderships in both sides in Cyprus, but particularly the Greek Cypriot leadership, how do they envision the solution of the Cyprus problem? What is their fantasy regarding the solution of the Cyprus problem? It is an imaginary about a day of freedom or a day of reunification, which will come about after the two leaders will sit down on a table and sign a paper, and that will be the doomsday. This is a tragic misunderstanding of how things work in real life. And Andreas is shedding light on this. I'm reading from his own document, page 2035 in the draft that I have in my possession, but I think it must have changed in the final, print edition. You cannot enter a new state of affairs in 24 hours. The Cyprus conflict is a complicated one. It's been there since the late 1950s, and it goes without saying that an evolutionary approach is necessary to bring about peace and stability in Cyprus. Thank you very much, Andreas Theophanous, for pinpointing this for us. Thank you very much for your attention.
Last but not least, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance. First of all, I would like to congratulate Professor Theophanous for this contribution to the literature. In his book, he is actually providing the reader with a comparative and critical assessment of the politics conducted by all the presidents of the Republic of Cyprus. He actually eliminates the negotiation processes beginning from 1960s and coming up to the present age. The book also sheds light on the primary foreign policy objectives of the Republic of Cyprus, of course, that of Turkey, Greece, and attitudes of European Union, United Kingdom, United States of America, Russia, and China, and of course, France and other involved parties, for instance, regional actors, including Egypt and Israel, towards the Cyprus issue. Actually, both of the speakers, Professor Theophanous and Professor Kontos, they emphasize something, that the life is dynamic. Therefore, when talking about a possible resolution to the Cyprus question, we have to keep in mind that the Cyprus question dates back to maybe 1950s, 60s, 70s, but the possible resolution to it will belong to the present age. So we have to bear in mind that the time has changed, the world has changed, the humanity has changed, and of course the society of Cyprus has changed. I would like to talk about the leaders, the negotiation process, but actually I would like to begin with what do I mean by saying that the time has changed. How much time do I have, by the way?
You have 7 minutes.
7 minutes? Mm-hmm. Okay. Actually, as political scientists, nowadays we have two favorite terms, post-truth and postmodernism. Those two concepts are affecting the life of humanity all around the world, and Cyprus is not an exception to that. For instance, in 1950s and 1960s, on the island as elsewhere in the world, the people were following ideologies. Enthusiastically, they were following political ideologies. Let it be the Turkish nationalism, let it be the Greek nationalism, let it be liberalism, let it be socialism. But currently, in the 21st century, people's attachment to political ideologies are declining. And also, on both sides of the island, if you have a look at the turnout in elections, it is constantly decreasing. And as I have told, Cyprus is not an exception to this. It is happening in many other countries in Europe and elsewhere in the world. Actually, as the people are losing their attachment to political ideologies, they are actually losing their attachment to identities as well. For instance, during the conflict in Cyprus in 1950s and 1960s, 1970s also, for an ordinary person on the island, the priority was being a Greek. The priority was being a Turk. But in the 21st century, many people are losing their attachment to these national identities. They claim to be, okay, Turkish Cypriot or Greek Cypriot, apart from mentioning the cultural ties that are actually converted into political ties with the motherlands, Greece and Turkey. People simply prefer to identify themselves as Greek Cypriot or Turkish Cypriot, but this is also in decline because of the 21st century, because of its characteristics of post-truth and post-modernity. For instance, currently, if you ask an ordinary person in Cyprus nowadays, it is not their national identity to be the priority. Maybe they won't say, I'm Greek, I'm Turkish. Maybe they won't say either, I'm Greek Cypriot or Turkish Cypriot. Simply, I am a member of that trade union. I'm a member of this association. Or I'm just doing the profession X or Y. Or, to put even more simply, maybe they will say, I'm just Yorgos. I'm just Ahmed. Because the post-modernity and post-truth, as I told you, and I'm not talking about Cyprus in particular, I'm talking about the world in general, is actually leading the people to have less attachment to their social identities. Less attachment to a social identity for Cyprus, it actually means more difficulties to resolve the Cyprus conflict. Because people are not engaged in politics as actively as they used to do. As I told you, there is a significant decline in turnout in Cyprus, in both communities. The post-truth politics, another important point to emphasize. Currently, some people are losing their interest in politics for various reasons, but some others maintain their interest in politics, but the way they are responsive to politics is actually like accepting everything they hear in favor of their political thought, their political orientation, or their political affiliation, maybe political party. When they hear anything about their party, they accept it. If it is positive, they accept it to be true. Give them 100 evidences, they won't change mind. When they hear something which is negative about their political party or affiliation, give them 100 evidences, they won't accept if it is negative, if it is against their political affiliation. And on the social media, as everyone knows, fake news is becoming more and more popular. The lynch culture, attacking the people via the social media, is becoming more and more popular. And the way we conduct politics is not the way our elders actually conducted politics. So, both of the speakers emphasized one more thing, the evolutionary cooperation. I think this is what we need to save ourselves from post-truth and postmodern politics. As the people are showing less attachment to ideologies and identities, showing them practical solutions for their daily life problems, maybe, for instance, opening one more checkpoint in Nicosia, can be an important way forward, an important step forward. And unfortunately, as some people keeping away themselves from the politics, and they are usually the people with higher humanitarian sensitivities, higher humanitarian and intellectual awarenesses, and the people who are following the post-truth manipulation because of their emotional or political orientations. It is very difficult to find a way, find the middle ground between those groups in the society. And I'm talking about both communities, by the way. I'm not portraying the one community or the other. And actually, this is a general display of the contemporary political thought in the world, which is becoming more and more dominant. So, 1 minute to sum up. Okay. So, the advantage of the evolutionary cooperation, I think it will be, can be inclusive for a great portion of people by showing them that yes, nothing can start in 24 hours, nothing can be completed in 24 hours and accomplished, but they can pave a safe way for the collective future. Thank you very much for listening.
So, thank you very much, all three of you. I would like to ask a question to Professor Theophanous. I mean, it's obvious that a lot of work and research has taken place to outline what happened. But I think, although it will be very interesting to read the whole book, what I would like to focus on is on the way forward, if that's okay. You speak about a solution which cannot be achieved within 24 hours. I would like you to expand a bit on that, please. Thank you.
Okay, well, just before I get to your question, one or two things to say about the Greek version and the English version. Well, I have kept notes from the late 70s, 80s, from books, articles, and also notes from people that I met and we talked, from various countries, and they were protagonists. And, you know, in 21, 22, when we were in COVID, some of my friends told me, Andreas, you are something, we want a few lectures of things you tell us from time to time. So I gave 7 lectures on the Cyprus question, and then the last evening we went out for drinks, and they said, you have to put this in writing. I did. It took me a year, 40 plus 1 a year. Then when it was done, I got several reviews, and then they said, it's important that it must be in English. I tried to do translation, it didn't work out, so it was a rewrite, because talking to an international audience, it's different. And also there was an additional chapter on the guarantor countries, foreign powers, etc. Additional appendixes took certain things out that it would be only for Greeks. And so I consider this version much more complete, the English one. Now, in relation to what you asked, you see, negotiations, why didn't we arrive at negotiations in 51 years? You know, I want to tell you the following, that I'm not going to name persons, but I know when people in both communities, they thought that they were very near, both of them wished that there would be something to stop it. I was there. Chatham rules, I cannot say names. Okay. Now, the other element is, the question is, if I was not a Cypriot, if I was a person that didn't travel in the northern part of Cyprus, and I would say, okay, it's a mess, live side by side with all that it means. Now, in my work, I want to be forward-looking, and I think it's important to have an attempt for an integrated society. And I know this cannot occur from one day to the other, period. You know, so methodologically what I'm trying to say is the following. Okay, since it will be a federation, what kind of a federation it has better chances to have continuity? I start that question. I ask myself at the theoretical level. And over the years, I had invited several theories from various countries to discuss issues of federation. That's number one. The second thing is, in addition to a constitution, you know, marriage, it's something that, okay, you may say it's a time you agree to get married when you go to church or to a mayor or whatever, but it's what happens every day at home. So the question is, we must see different aspects. How can we cooperate on issues of health, education, governance, and also to see the art of, you know, compromise and not being a maximum. And okay, when you have rights, you don't have to exercise all of them. Exercise the ones you think. Now, are we at that level of sophistication? I don't think so. I don't think so. Today there is apolitic too, you mentioned it, apolitic, and sophistication is lacking. So you need to go step by step. And I think if this happens, I think Cyprus would be very useful not only to its citizens, but to the broader area, in the sense we could be useful for the European Union, we could be useful for the countries in the Middle East too, if we manage to have a situation of coexistence and tolerance. This is something that is very much needed in the Middle East. And allow me to say one more thing in relation to this. I remember in 2004, December 2004, I was asked to visit Israel as a visiting professor, Hebrew University of Jerusalem. It was the time that the relations between Israel and Turkey were very close. Israel was much closer to Turkey at the time. So I was asked to teach a course at the master's level in 20 days, about 50, 60 hours, Euro-Turkish relations in Cyprus. I did. Then I came back home, and then more than half of my students, they told me, Andreas, we want to visit you. I said, welcome. Okay. They visited. They told me, we want to visit the other side. I said, go ahead. Do what you want. I mean, like, I'm not going to tell you what you do, okay? They told me, okay, we'll visit one day, and then in the evening we meet at such and such a restaurant in the Green Line to have a drink and souvlaki. I said, yes. We met. They were a little bit scared. They go to me, when you go back and forth, there are no checks. I mean, like, aren't you afraid that somebody may come with bombs, or aren't they afraid you go with bombs? They were very much surprised that people, you know, they only saw IDs and they were afraid. They had their own experiences that it's too much control and everything. I said, no, it's important to have conflict management, I said, before you go to conflict resolution. And we discussed this. So what I'm saying here is that we are not very happy with the status quo, but, you know, things could have been worse. The question is, how do you make them to be better, to improve them? I have no doubt that this could be done, but I don't think any major development can take place in Cyprus without the inclusion of Turkey itself, given its objectives. The question is that what would give Turkey an incentive to be tolerant and let Cyprus go? And that's a question. And again, this cannot happen overnight. It needs much more. And I think time is important, and also sophistication is important about getting those results. I am confident, and I'm sure, that these suggestions constitute a better approach than the one used so far in 51 years. I dare say this.
Thank you. And if it's okay, one more question from me, and then we'll open it up to our audience, who have been very patiently waiting. You said that the minimum, that's how you finished it, the minimum would be for things not to get worse, as you know, when you were saying what you want to happen, and the maximum is so that, you know, we move on to a proper federation solution. But don't you think that throughout it's inevitable for things to get worse on the path that we are now? I mean, because the separation, the mistrust between the two communities don't forebode well. And then also, like as a second part of the same question, how could we possibly move towards a federation when right now the positions of the two sides are in such, there's a huge gap between them?
Ms. Phillips, dear Evie, I will tell you the following. I don't like partition, but I don't think partition is the worst that can happen to the Greek Cypriots. I want to repeat. I don't like partition, but I don't think that partition is the worst that can happen to the Greek Cypriots. There is also an illusion in Cyprus that any solution is better than the status quo. I spent years in studying conflict resolution, conflict management, and federal models. There are some models that are sure they will collapse, and there are some models that you have a good chance that it will work out. Unfortunately, our political system in Cyprus, I'm being very critical right now, has not engaged in studying these things. I understand in 74 and 75, in view of the shock, to agree to things without understanding what they were agreeing. But 51 years later, not to have a systematic study of federal systems and of governance in biethnic and multi-ethnic states, it's disaster. If I hear, for example, that we have budget surpluses, 4%, and we, you know, and that gets you a point from the axiologists, how we call them, you know, the credit rating. Well, to me, it doesn't mean anything. And if, for example, or it doesn't mean much to be precise, or to spend 67 million to pay in fines for environment damages and all that, and not to pay attention to things of our survival, I cannot be impressed by our political systems. I'm not impressed. But you can say in other places they are worse. That is true. Okay. So what I'm saying is that on the one hand in Cyprus we hear people saying unitary state and this, that, and some of these people, they talk as if Cyprus has 300,000 troops, 300 planes, 3,000 drones, etc., etc. I smile, you know, when I hear that. And at the same time, other people naively say, any solution, you know, brothers, we are brothers, sisters, and any solution. I don't like extreme. You know, when I was younger, I liked Plato, the perfectionist. As I matured, according to Mr. Kontos, you know, since I was born with the Republic, I believe in Aristotle. Aristotle says everything in moderation. So I take a modest approach to things. And I don't believe that, you know, time is necessarily, you know, working against us. I will tell you the following. In 1990, it was one state of affairs. In 2004, when we were in the Union, we were better than we were in 1990. Now, did we utilize our position as members of the European Union? I don't think so. I will tell you an example. I get from time to time, you know, requests from Brussels to talk about the security issues in Europe. They told me, Theophanous, are you going to write something about security perceptions from the view of Nicosia, I said, I'm too busy, but I'll do it for you. How many words? So many words. And then they sent me an appendix. In the appendix, the word Cyprus was not there. You had Ukraine, you had Georgia, you had Moldova, you had everything. Can somebody say, if you're going to be serious in the European Union, Cyprus is a litmus test for your credibility? I mean, like, we didn't do our homework. Now, by nature, I'm a person who, I'm pragmatic, and at the same time, I try to have cautious optimism. I think we should try. I think we should try. And at the same time, I want to share one last point in relation to this question. I grew up in a society, and at a time that it was, you have to have only one identity. You had to be either a Greek or Cypriot. You couldn't be both. Today, we are in the era of multiple identities. I could be proud of my village in the Trodos area. When I was small, I thought it was the center of the universe, Alona. Okay. I'm very proud of my city, Nicosia. Okay. Very proud of Cyprus, very proud to be part of the Hellenic heritage, to be Greek. Okay. European, that's not my strongest element of identity, by the way, but that's another thing. You know. So we could have 5 and 7 ideas, and the question is that here, can we cultivate, can we advance some common objectives and common identities with all Cypriots together? I think that's possible. So we require sophistication, and we cannot expect things to come from God. You know, there is an old Greek saying says, it used to be at the time of the ancient Greeks and the modern Greeks, Sin Athina και χείρα κίνη. That's a classical Greek version, which meaning, in addition to expecting goddess Athena to help you, move your hand too. So the same today, while we're trying to get support and also ideas from abroad, and you know, we see what we must do on our own at various levels. And despite circumstances and despite difficulties, we have to try and to do our best always. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to open the panel for questions from the audience.
Hello, my name is Tomasz, coming here from Poland. I would like to ask a bit for you to dwell more about why coming to the European Union was not so successful in this sense, because back in 2000, we were talking a lot about 60s, 70s, but back in 2004, Poland and Cyprus joined the EU together, and there was some kind of a hope that Turkey maybe will enter EU at some point. This hope is lost right now, but we were maybe hoping that coming to the bigger entity, as in the case of Ireland and Spain, will solve some problems on the ground. But coming here from the eastern flank, where I feel like my country faces existential threat to its security, as long as Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia that you mentioned, I just really don't like when we in Poland sometimes do not have too much attention to the southern border of the EU and southern countries. So I wanted to ask you, because you said that that this is some kind of a credibility test for the EU. So I wanted to ask you, all of you, what is this credibility test? What was supposed to be done better by the EU rather than just more listening? Because also this case is being watched. Like Moldova just won, pro-European parties won elections last weekend, and they very often refer to the case of Cyprus, that even when you don't have a control over your own territory, some part of your own territory, as in the case of Transnistria, you can still enter the EU, which is a goal in itself. So what should be done better in Brussels, and how Eastern Flank can listen to you more?
Thank you very much for your question. I want to raise two issues. You see, in 1974, when we had the invasion, I want to tell you the following. The West didn't treat Cyprus fairly. I mean, I want to be very blunt with this. The coup was not crowned in Cyprus. You had Greece, under the strong influence of the CIA and the United States, which overthrew Michalis, a NATO country. You had another NATO country invading Cyprus. You had Britain, another guarantor power, who took pictures instead of acting. And, for example, after the first invasion, when there were moves, for example, the British were saying to the Americans, let's do something to stop the war. Kissinger said, I don't see any reason why the Turks could not take more than 1/3 of the island. So you understand in Cyprus, there was a strong anti-Western feeling. In Cyprus, there was a strong anti-Western feeling. And I remember as a teenager myself, 16, 17 years old, when I watched some of the rallies of President Michalis, the crowd downstairs, you know what we were yelling? Michalis should go to Moscow. And Michalis would answer, I would go anywhere needed, even to the underworld, for the freedom of Cyprus. So there was a strong reaction against the West. In 1981, Greece, feeling guilty about what happened in Cyprus, he told the Cypriots, the only way to have a better chance is the European Union. At the time, it was the European Community. So in Cyprus, gradually, there was a pragmatism, all happened, let's see how it happened. And when I came from the United States, I was one of the few Cypriots who led a campaign to move towards, to apply to become a member of the European Union. I remember that. And in that aspect, I remember Democratic Rally was at the time in opposition. Democratic Rally asked me to help them with a pro-European campaign I did. And then President Vasiliou asked me to be advisor in economic affairs and other related issues. And we tried to change Cypriots to want the European Union. In the 90s, Cypriots were the people who were very strongly in favor of the Union. The ratings were more than any other country. What happened? Cypriots were very much frustrated because they had higher expectations from the Union. As a matter of fact, not only in the Cyprus problem, we found ourselves that, if we talk about invasion and occupation, they told us to be more quiet about our words. Okay. And when the economic crisis happened, we were treated very harshly. Ukraine was not a member of the European Union and received much more help and attention than Cyprus was a member. Obviously, when I write about security and I write about education, people in Brussels, they told me, well, what about Russian aggression? I said, I'm very sorry about Russian aggression. I'm very concerned as a country who has suffered invasion. I support international law. But you must understand that I'm much more concerned about Cyprus than any other country in the world. As you're concerned about your country more than any other country in the world. We show solidarity, but are you surprised that we are thinking first about the Turkish occupation? We talk about existential threat about Poland. I visited the occupation. Cyprus is almost half occupied. Poland is not occupied. And I don't think there is a threat of attack on Poland. Talking about, I want to say something else about the European issues, because they're very important. In the nuclear age, we must be very careful. What do I mean? I remember the Cold War. The Cold War, how was European security guaranteed? You had the United States signing with Moscow agreements every 4 or 5 years. And kept going. I don't see any reason today why, for example, we could not have European security also involving, as it used to be in the past, the United States, in coming into some form of agreement. And I think the first objective of the European Union right now when it comes to security is to talk about the territorial integrity of its member countries. About that. About Ukraine, I'm really very sorry. And I want to share with you another thing. As a center, we were pioneer. At the Cyprus Center for European International Affairs, we used to have every other 2 years international conferences involving Europeans, Americans, and Russians, and sometimes we invited Israelis too. And as a matter of fact, we were the first center to host the Russian and the Ukrainian ambassador after Crimea, 2 times. I think it's a tragedy what happened, and I wanted to talk to you about a small similarity. Self-determination of Cyprus. Did we have the right of enosis? I think yes, but we should not have talked about exercising it. We should have been, we could have said, a unitary state. Because of the balance of power of this, because of geography and all that. Ukraine, did it have the right of self-determination? Of course it had. Okay. But there was another power which said that full exercise of that self-determination may imply security risk for them, like the United States did with the Cuban crisis, and it said, if the Soviet missiles are not removed, there will be trouble. So, in the nuclear age, we have to be very careful, and I believe in collective security. There must be talk much more between the United States and Europe about arriving at a collective security issue. You know, I think that now. And we, for example, I wish Cyprus was between Greece and Italy. It is not. It's in the heart of the Eastern Mediterranean, next to Turkey, a very difficult neighborhood. So we have to see how we have to manage.
One last question, please.
I'm Michalis. I'm running a small political party in Cyprus. But my question is to Mr. Sevki about artificial intelligence and decentralized technologies. Because we have 3 big empires collapsed after the First World War, which was the British, the Russian, and Austro-Hungary. Then we have United Nations Club of 180 nations. So, decentralization. And now we have artificial intelligence. And according to Google AI chief book, New Wave, Mustafa Suleiman, the new form of governance will be in the sphere of decentralization, because the technology which is affordable now, which used to be only affordable to the governments, now affordable to any community, security, education, and everything, cheap. So what is your view towards the influence of artificial intelligence and decentralization? Will it bring a collapse to UN Club? And will more nations or communities will be developed? And that's my question.
Thank you very much for the question. In a recent article of mine that I co-authored with a colleague of mine, we were discussing the very point that you just raised. What will be the future of democracies with the misinformation, with the artificial intelligence, with post-truth, and so on and so forth. Actually, the only way currently, thanks to the technological development, to struggle the effects of misinformation caused by the use of artificial intelligence is still the use of artificial intelligence again. For instance, if a content is artificial intelligence supported, and it has a content which is disinformation, artificial intelligence detects it. So we are using robots, actually, we are using robots, technology, computers, to say it more simply, more accurately. We are using computers to save us from the computers. We are going towards such a future. And Michel Foucault has the term panopticon about the surveillance strategies of the modern state. Actually, social media and artificial intelligence is becoming exactly a panopticon to surveil citizens, what they are doing. For the governments, they are taking some measurements to secure our personal data, but on the internet, well, we give our consent by clicking yes, yes, yes to just get dispose of the questions and get access to the content that we want to get the access. We sometimes give our, consent without even noticing it. So the use of artificial intelligence and technology with the correct purposes and methods is actually a chance for the democracy, but we need further critical thinking generations to be taught based on critical thinking and awareness of disinformation and awareness of what we come across with in the social media and internet. Thank you for your contribution.
I would like to thank Professor Theophanous, Professor Kontos, and Professor, I can pronounce your name, Kiralp. Thank you very much. I was Evie Phillips. I didn't introduce me in the beginning. And I would also very much like to thank our lovely audience for your patience and attendance. Thank you.